I think it's important not to just always think as sustainability as a standalone subject, but it's an integral part of our strategy.
Mhm. Hello, and welcome back to another special bonus episode of the Plugged In podcast, recorded in partnership with BMW at Climate Week New York City. I'm Patrick George, editor-in-chief of InsideEVs.
And I'm Tim Levin, senior editor at InsideEVs.
On today's episode, we're going to talk about how to reduce CO2 emissions in automotive manufacturing. Making cars more efficient is great, but producing those cars in a less harmful way is even better. And we're joined today, to my left is Hendrik Lang, the Senior Vice President of Supply Chain Strategy and Sustainability. And to Tim's right, Inga Grieger, Business Development Manager at BMW iVentures. Hendrik and Inga, thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be
Thank
here.
you.
Inga, I'd like to start with you because I want to get some background on BMW iVentures. I'm always really interested in the venture arms of the various automakers we cover and what they do and what they're looking towards. Because you deal in future technology. So tell us about BMW iVentures and what you've been up to there lately.
Absolutely. And it's great to be here because BMW iVentures was founded back in 2011. And I don't want to bore you with the whole story, but we started in New York City. So it's great to be here again in
Welcome
this
home.
room. Yeah. And the first ask was to get a step into new technologies. So BMW set up BMW iVentures as the corporate venture capital arm of the BMW group. So we started with first and single investments in the New York City. And then they saw it's not only efficient in sense of getting a new step into new technology, so it's also on the return side. And then they decided to set up the first fund. And with that one, 2016, BMW Ventures moved into the Silicon Valley, right? So there's a venture capital scene to be there in the network, in the ecosystem as well. And we have by today our office in Munich in Silicon Valley. And we have now with the second fund, 800 million asset under management. And we are investing along the transportation technology industry, from car development topics to manufacturing to supply chain, digital sales and services like after sales platforms, IT, and sustainability. And we have now invested in more than 85 companies. We have right now 61 active portfolio companies. And typically we are in a series A and B. So this is when the companies are already have a foot on the ground and expanding their technologies. And this is where we are looking for new solutions.
I think this is a thing that a lot of people might not know exists about a car company. Like, why have a venture fund that exists to invest in future technologies? How does that benefit you? And how has it benefited BMW?
We have several benefits in this sense, and I think it's very crucial for automotive manufacturing or as BMW as well to have a CVC in place, because we look beside the strategy to new solutions in a field of a technology. Like example, for picking new technologies up, like new battery technologies, and get a foot into these forms. Like you maybe already have seen upstairs the round cell battery technologies, where we have been very fast from an independent investment side. So we did the first investment in solid power, and after this has been a first good investment, and then the strategic potential elaborates in the BMW group, and this is why then the BMW group stepped
For those who
forward.
don't know, Solid Power, one of the bigger companies and more promising companies in the solid state battery space.
Yes.
So yeah, you guys have been a big partner of theirs.
Yeah, so basically it means you as a venture fund have this kind of visibility into like the technologies coming maybe 5-10 years down the road at these kind of really innovative companies, that then over time the bigger group, the BMW group, can maybe leverage those. Is that the kind of idea?
Yes, so we are operating like a venture capital fund independently. So we do our investments decision on our own. So we are seeking for new solutions in that kind of field. And this is why my role came up afterwards. So usually I say, first of all, we are doing the investments. And then on the second stage, we are looking how we can bring strategic relevance to the BMW group. So personally, as a business development manager, I work with our portfolio companies together and see how we can bring them and the effort to the BMW group, start initialize, pilot projects running, and so on.
So Tim, you just said that these investments often help BMW maybe in 10 years' time. Actually, it does happen quite fast sometimes. So there are a lot of investments which iVentures has made, which are actually already influencing the way we work and the way we build cars. Bcomp is a company whose products, natural fibers, we are already using in series cars. And there are other companies like Cyclic Materials who give us impulses on using secondary materials in the vehicle. So I think there's a very close link between the innovative companies iVentures invests into and the actual daily business which we deal with.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that company. This is making basically a carbon fiber substitute, right, out of flax, out of a renewable material. Tell us, I mean, both of you, tell us about that company, and I would love to hear about how you're actually integrating that into cars right now.
I think Become is a super interesting story because they are coming up or why the technology is now so interesting by now is there was a rule change on the motorsport side, right? And usually they use carbon fiber, and then there was the ask to have more sustainable solution in this. And it's great to have Christian Fischer today with us, from CEO from Become. And so this was the first turn where the flux-based performance parts came on the road, right? And if you have passed all these kind of qualifications to come into a motorsport part. So hopefully we see the next steps on continuing on that one. So it's a really 100% natural base, the flux. So it's really growing and you can earn it and you put it into the performance part. And they have the same performance like carbon fiber parts. But there's also one advantage. In a case you have a crash or sometimes, carbon fiber is splitting into thousands of
Yeah,
parts
shreds. Yeah.
and flax because out of their original material it's just bombing, and so it's from a race perspective it's also more safety driving for the drivers.
To add on to that, carbon fiber, everybody loves it. Looks cool. It's great on race cars. It's great on M3s and M4s. It turns out it's kind of an environmental nightmare to make this stuff. It's very energy intensive. So it sounds like this is one of many ways they're trying to find, like an alternative to that, as I understand. Correct?
And only just to add for the, I think the BMW designers, why they love to work with that together is you can play also with the bindings, also with the coloring, what you can't do with the carbon fiber itself. So it's great to see the roof just upstairs. So if by chance, take a look at this.
Very cool. Yeah, so I would love to hear, I mean, you mentioned that you're already putting that in cars or maybe putting it into cars that are in development right now. Tell us about that.
Yeah, as Inga said, we qualified this material with motorsports, and this, of course, opens up opportunities in series production. And as Inga just said, it's one of the areas where we can actually also put sustainability on display. We don't hide it anywhere. We can really make it visible to the customer. And I think that's really an appealing thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about some of the other iVentures portfolio companies that have to do with, you know, adding more sustainability to the supply chain. Anything else that comes to mind on that front?
I mean, there are a couple of, and right, so sustainability, as I mentioned, is one of our investment parts, but it's also like a pillar. And with all of our investments, we try to support the CO2 targets at the end of the day. But as Henrik just gave a first impression on, is like cyclic materials. What I want to mention, what they do is like all the rest of batteries or metallics or motors or whatever. We are not using raw materials, what we can get out of it at the moment. So only 1% are reduced by today. So cyclic materials has a technologies where you can put out or recycle all these kind of raw materials out of the waste at the end of the day. So it's a new source to have raw materials reused again.
Right. And so 1% are recycled today. And you said this is specifically about rare earth magnets, right? This is about
Mm.
reclaiming this really important material that goes into motors and all types of other components in a car.
It comes from one place on it.
And it only,
Yeah.
yeah. And as we saw recently, it only comes from China. When there is a ban or a, tariff, it wasn't a tariff. When there's a ban on exports of that, it throws the entire automotive supply chain for a loop. So basically, this company can, give BMW and others another source of that. That's kind of the idea?
Yeah, it's a Canada-based company, and they are now building or scaling up their production facilities in United States. I'm in Arizona, so still more to come in this place. So the solution is already proved, and it can be done, and also expanding on several plant facilities.
Hendrik, I'd like to add on to that and talk about, you oversee supply chain at BMW. Tell us about some of the challenges that your company has had on the supply chain front in the last 5 years or so.
Yeah,
One or two big ones, right?
I was just going to say, yeah, we've had some fun in the last 5 years. Yeah.
Tell us more.
The good thing about that is it's really brought supply chains into the public, into visibility.
Yeah.
And just to name a few, we've had the semiconductor crisis. I think everybody's aware of that.
Yeah, during COVID-19.
In Europe, we were severely hit by the Ukraine war. We had a lot of suppliers in Ukraine, and obviously with the breakout of the war, that supply chain was definitely difficult to manage. And then I think we talked about it earlier. COVID. We had suppliers who had to shut down their plants because of COVID, and maintaining supply chains in that context is quite a challenge.
Yeah.
I don't know how familiar you are with automotive supply chains. They are
Probably
really
more than most people, but not as much as you.
they really are complex, probably the most complex supply chains in industry as a whole.
Yeah.
BMW is supplying 36 million parts per day to our plants every single day, in quality, in time, at the right location. And to do this, we have 2,700 first-tier suppliers who we have direct contractual agreements with. But behind that, we have 65,000 second-tier suppliers, and behind that, third-tier, fourth-tier, fifth-tier suppliers. That's why we actually don't talk about a supply chain. We talk about a supplier network.
Yeah.
And in that network, you have hundreds of thousands of suppliers. And you can imagine that there are not many days when you don't have any issues in one of those locations.
So it's a lot of moving parts when you're trying to get everything to be greener and better on CO2 over time. Like how do you manage all of those components, and move them in the right direction?
Yeah, yeah. So you have to prioritize. You can't manage 100,000 suppliers at the same time when you're talking about sustainability, about CO2 reduction, about circularity. You need to prioritize. And luckily, that works quite well because if you look at the total vehicle, then 2/3 of the CO2 emissions actually come from aluminium, steel, and high voltage batteries. So those are the areas you want to focus on, and those are the suppliers you want to focus
Big
on.
targets.
Those are the big targets, yeah. And then you can actually focus on the big hitters in those supply chains. And we have three main levers to reduce CO2 at these suppliers. It's the use of green energy, it's increase of secondary materials, and it's process optimization and innovation. So with these three levers, we are really effectively able to decarbonize the product. And if you look at the iX3, behind all the great technical features which you've talked about a lot, there are some pretty impressive numbers in the on the sustainability side. So, for instance, the iX3 you could see up there is has a supply chain product carbon footprint which is 42% less than the predecessor model.
Yeah.
And all this is achieved by the measures I've just mentioned.
That's remarkable. So tell us about your overall carbon neutrality goals at BMW. This is not, as an American, it's not something that you hear about as much from our companies, but it's like you have very set goals you're trying to achieve as a company with CO2
Yes,
reductions.
absolutely. We have a very clear decarbonization strategy. So always with the basis year 2019, we are aiming to reduce our CO2 footprint by 40 million tons by 2030 and to achieve net zero by 2050. And the supply chain obviously is an integral part of that complete strategy.
That's the first goal you mentioned is 5 years away. What progress are you making on that so far?
We are completely on track.
Remarkable.
And I think what's interesting about this path is that whereas what is very well known in the public is that we have a clear electrification strategy. So our vehicles will shift towards battery electric vehicles, and we aim to have 50% of our product portfolio and our volumes to be fully battery electric vehicles by 2030. And that shifts the focus for decarbonization to the supply chain.
Mhm.
So if you want to continue on this road to net zero, then and the use phase is basically covered by electric vehicles, then you need to focus on the supply chain.
Hmm. And so you mentioned the three big parts that you're focusing on: aluminum, steel, and battery, because
Yes.
those are the dirtiest. Um, when you go to your and you mentioned you can do a few different things to kind of mitigate that. How do you do? What's the conversations like there? Because like you said, these are suppliers. These are supplier networks that are supplying you these metals and these components. What does that conversation look like? Is it like you go to them and you say, "Hey, you have to, start using more renewable energy, or we're going to go find a different supplier"? How do you push these suppliers in the direction that you want them to go?
Well, I think it's always a collaboration and a partnership, but you do have to have clear requirements. So just like our engineers will have clear requirements about the material properties, so in supply chain management we have clear requirements about CO2 footprint, about the percentage of secondary materials which we expect, and this is the basis for developing the product and for negotiating the contract with the suppliers.
Hmm.
If you start this early on, so before you enter into development and into production, then we find the suppliers are open to it. They understand why it's necessary. They also understand why it makes them more resilient and our supply chain more resilient. So if you address it early on in the development phase of the product, then we find it's possible to achieve these goals with our suppliers.
An iX3 and Neue Klasse, that's like the first effort that was like designed from scratch to be this way, right? Not just like along the way, but like from a clean sheet, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, our engineers, they always tell the story that they were so happy that they could start on a clean sheet of paper when they designed the Neue Klasse. But the same goes for supply chain management. We also started on a clean sheet of paper, and we were able to implement these measures like higher secondary material quotas and like green energy right from the beginning. And this is a huge opportunity for us, and that's why the Neue Klasse has these impressive figures, like a third of the vehicle is made of secondary materials. You don't see that in many other cars in the world, I would
Mhm.
say.
And when you talk about the aluminum, steel, and batteries, take us through like which one of those has had the most progress, which is kind of more challenging. What are the different challenges associated with these different components?
Okay, yeah, they all have different challenges. Let's start with the high voltage batteries.
Yeah.
We have a very high secondary quota of materials on high voltage batteries. It's actually 50% for the critical raw materials like lithium, like cobalt and nickel. So what's the challenge here? Um, there are not that many used batteries on the market. Electromobility is just ramping up,
Yeah.
and for our suppliers to actually get secondary raw materials from the market is actually quite a challenge. Because we're, I would say, a first mover in this area, we were able to agree this contractually to achieve these very high secondary material rates. But that's definitely going forward a challenge as we ramp up in volume to maintain these levels.
And as you have more manufacturers probably jumping in
Yes,
and
exactly.
competing
There are
for the same limited amount of recycled materials.
exactly there are the second and third movers, and they also want their share. So, I mean, at the end of the day, for the environment, it's positive if everybody jumps on that wagon.
Right. Versus with some of the other, with steel and aluminum, I imagine
Yeah, there.
there's no shortage of recycled material, but it's maybe it's about the way it's actually made, reducing CO2 in the
Exactly,
manufacturing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's less of a challenge, I would say, the feedstock there. It's more, let's take steel. In Europe, we have the majority of steel is produced by a process called BOF, basic oxygen furnace, and that basically uses coal in the process. So very high CO2 emissions. In the US, you have electric arc furnace, which is a process where you use electricity instead of coal, and a lot of scrap material, much better CO2 footprint. Now, if we want to have CO2 reduced steel in Europe, we need to bring new technologies to Europe.
Mhm.
And BMW as a player, we are a small company in the great scheme of things. We are a small customer to the steel mills.
Yeah.
So, how do you convince them to bring new technologies with high investments to Europe? You need to actually work together in the industry. So we need to be more than just BMW looking at this. We need a whole industry movement. So the challenge there is really to move a whole industry in that direction. Yeah.
That's a great segue because Inga, I want to ask you about just the state of sustainability investments in the United States specifically, because a lot of what we talked about so far is, the European Union has a very clear target of where it wants to move things. As of recently here in the United States, we're going in a very different direction. So, like, what do investments look like in the sustainability tech space in America right now? Still optimistic, and I guess how do you balance that being a global company with these markets moving in such different directions?
I mean, just to add on, and we just came from the steel part, right? So we already did several investments in this field. So it's not a new topic for us right now, right? So it's not coming to a different focus by today. So we have invested in Boston Metal, like the name says, is a Boston-based company, and what they do is a CO2-free steel production. So they have a different, and this is why Henrik also mentioned about maybe twisting some kind of technologies where you get the idea of a technologies where you bring this into real life or bridging this between the different markets. So this is, I think, one of the technologies where we see this is at scale by today. So it's out of the first beginning and see if the technology works. It's now they have built up and set up their facility and will produce by next year the steel production. So there we can definitely see live that this comes to reality.
Yeah.
And this is just one example along the supply chain, right? So there are so many sustainability topics around. So we could stay here for more than an hour, I would say, to jump on several companies. But Henry,
I guess you don't feel like the pace of investments is slowing down that space in the current environment. Not really.
no, because
Good.
for us, it's one of the investment themes. So when we have set up our fund back in 2021, and we decided sustainability is one of our factors for where we are looking at, so it's still there. So nothing new to add in
I
this
guess
direction.
are you concerned that there could be fewer, there's less of an incentive for new entrepreneurs who want to start a company to start their company in a clean field under this current environment?
They are really looking into this field, right?
Yeah.
So it's nothing where you say this needs to be separate, or they are just thinking within their idea the sustainability part, and it's not only digging the ticket in the box and say, okay, we are also a sustain company. It's also providing this from the beginning.
It's sustainability is not always a means to itself. If you look at Inga's example of cyclic materials with the rare earths, yes, it has a sustainability aspect, but for us in supply chain management, it's a great way of becoming more resilient if you don't have to import raw materials.
Hmm.
And so I think that's completely it's maybe started off as a sustainability idea, but it's definitely one which is becoming strategically really important at the moment.
Mhm.
And sometimes you see it during the time, how the time changed, that a solution where we maybe already have invested now is more on a sustainability topic. Maybe just to give a short example on that one is like Agnano. They are doing gel coatings for semiconductors or electronic component. Now we know fluorine free, puff free is a super sustainable topic, right? So, and they already implemented in the solution back in 2019 they were founded, and we have invested 2021, so it's nothing new, so it's still there.
So I'd add to that. Henrik, you spoke to this like a moment ago. What happens if you don't make these investments? It all sounds great on paper, but like how vulnerable are you left? Do you risk being left behind technologically? Like, what is the risk for not doing the things that we are talking about right now?
You know, I mentioned the three main levers which we have for decarbonizing the supply chain, and the third one was processes and innovation. And this is where Inga comes in with her investments. And we mentioned a couple of companies now who are really becoming part of the BMW sustainability strategy, and we would miss those companies if Inga wasn't there to invest in them. Yeah.
Yeah, this is why we are more looking for more independent part, right? So
Yeah.
we can really dig into these technology fields and look for solutions maybe you're not thinking or not looking at the moment. And then the close collaboration shows what comes to hopefully more and more into reality.
Yeah. You had brought up also something earlier called digitalization of the supply chain. Can you explain what that is and how that's evolved? What do you guys do? Sure.
I would say it's mission critical. I
Yes.
just explained about the complexity of the supply chain of these hundreds of thousands of suppliers, and you cannot manage a network as complex as that without digitalization. And
And it's just what modern processes, modern systems to command and control all this stuff, basically.
Yeah, yes, and I would say in the past, digitalization of the supply chain often failed.
Yes.
Why did it fail? Because companies didn't want to share their data. They were worried about sharing data. The individual IT systems couldn't talk to each other. They
Right.
were incompatible. That's why data chains didn't work. And this is where we have a clear strategy. We're using Catena X. It's a data ecosystem which was developed by the automotive industry. That's OEMs and suppliers. And we developed it to address these specific issues. So the Catena X uses data standards, and it maintains the data sovereignty. So every company decides themselves which data they want to share and when to share it. It is software agnostic, so companies can use their own software systems, whether it's Excel or some fancy SAP system. So it addresses these issues, why the digitalization in the past wasn't successful. In the future, we hope together with Catena X, we can really digitally transform the supply chains. And we need that because if you want to decarbonize the supply chains, you need to know where your emissions are.
Right.
And the emissions, they don't usually occur on the first tier level. Only 20% of the CO2 emissions are actually on the first tier level. 80% are second tier, third tier.
Can you explain what that means? I'm sorry, just for yeah.
Okay, so the first tier level are the companies which we actually have contracts with,
Right.
the 2,700 companies which supply to BMW directly.
Yeah.
But that's not where the CO2 emissions are. The CO2 emissions are in the supply chains behind that,
Yeah.
in the
How they
third,
their
fourth.
parts and components.
Exactly, especially raw materials, the mining, the processing of raw materials.
Right.
So that's where you need to go.
Yeah.
And if you want to then follow the CO2 footprint through the supply chain, you need to build a data chain,
Yeah.
starting at the mine and ending with the final product. And we are establishing these data chains, and we piloted it on, for instance, the BMW kidney. So our main feature on the vehicle, the kidney, and
Kidney
we
grill.
the kidney grill,
Yeah.
exactly, yes, and we really followed through the whole supply chain right to the raw materials, the exact product footprint, and we've now got a digital supply chain which adds up the product carbon footprint through the supply chain.
So as I understand this, and I'll be if I'm explaining this right, that grill, that component, you know everything about its CO2 footprint, like from start to finish.
Exactly. Yes, that's right.
Unlike other parts of other cars or past vehicles where a lot of it would be a black box. Is that correct?
It's as you say, it's a process which we are starting.
Yeah.
At the moment, we're working a lot with industry averages, with standard values. But if you really want to go to net zero, then you need this exact product carbon footprint. That's when you need those data chains, and you need to know exactly my product. How does the carbon footprint add up over the supply
It's
chain?
fascinating to think about, right? What is the carbon footprint of one part of one car, not just the
Exactly.
car, not just tailpipe emissions like we're always
Yeah.
writing about, but
Yeah.
one part that
Yeah.
gets there. And starting with this grill, you know all of it from
We
start to finish.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully more
That's
parts.
the starting point, and we're rolling it out to we're looking
Yeah.
at it from a Pareto point of view. So where are the biggest emitters? And that's where we're starting to collect this data across the supply chain. We're going live this year and scaling up
It's
next
fascinating.
year. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned we talked about the semiconductor crisis, talked about rare earth magnets. What are you trying to get ahead of in terms of supply chain resilience? Like, what are the next the next phases, the next materials and components that you think, okay, we really need to be thinking right now, just in case something happens? Like,
Might I add, what keeps you awake at
yeah, yeah, exactly. What keeps you up at night about the supply chain and what you
Yeah.
need to fix?
About the supply chain specifically, other stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are a lot of things which keep us awake at night in the supply chains. But if you ask what are the big challenges ahead, then I think the semiconductors they remain a challenge. There are only a few locations in the world where the high performance semiconductors are produced. So this is definitely a challenge ahead. Batteries
Yeah.
are a challenge. I think, as everybody knows, China has very good technology and very competitive prices. But in Europe and in the US, we need to catch up, and we need to build local footprints for production of battery cells, and we need to build local footprints for the raw materials, the anode, the cathode. So those would be, I think, two of the most challenging areas in the future.
Do you think that we will see a slowdown in progress on the battery front here in the United States next few years? I tend to also think that this explosion in battery energy storage that we're seeing now for AI data centers, things like that, that seems like I think it will help the battery industry along in the meantime. I mean, what do you think of that, Reed?
Well, I can't speak for the whole industry. We have a very clear local for local strategy, which means that for battery electric vehicles, which we produce in the US, we want to produce the batteries and the cells in the US.
Yeah.
So this is clearly our goal, and this has not changed in the last years. So we're going forward in that direction. I can't speak for other companies what their strategies are.
Mhm. I guess I'd say at the very end, anything that you'd like to add about like that we might have missed that you think is critical to your mission and how you're trying to future proof your business. Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think what's important to note is that sustainability is not a means to itself. Sustainability is part of BMW's business strategy. We believe that sustainability gives us a future-proof business model.
Yeah.
Our stakeholders expect it, and it makes us more resilient against regulation, against importing raw materials. So I think it's important not to just always think as sustainability as a standalone subject, but it's an integral part of our strategy.
I guess lastly, does this mean a better product for the end consumer, better vehicle in the end? Do you think? You too?
I definitely think it makes a better product.
Yeah.
Our customers want to drive products which have a low impact.
Mhm.
And this is what our customers give feedback to us, and this is what we're providing. The iX3 has a much lower product carbon footprint. It uses less primary raw materials. That's what the customers expect, and that's why I think it's progress.
Yes. Inge, Hedrick, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks as always for listening to the Plugged In Podcast.
We'll be back this Friday with a fresh take on the week's EV news, and tune in next Wednesday for another bonus Climate Week interview with a BMW executive. This show was edited by Michael Perkins and brought to you by the Motorsport Network.
And special thanks to our friends at BMW for teeing this up.
Make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe to the InsideEVs YouTube channel, and check out all our EV coverage at InsideEVs.com. See you next time.